the session and stream for YouTube, perhaps?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for coming to the first Asia Pacific Journal of Elections and Democracy writing workshop. My name is Yos Kanawas, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. This first workshop aims to understand the editor's point of view when dealing with a manuscript. We want to understand what are some common key factors that make a manuscript stands out, what the editors want to see when they receive a manuscript, and the back-end process that happens during the review phase and other related subtopics. This is the first writing workshop, and there will be more sessions like this that will discuss different parts of academic journal writing. So please stay in touch with us, and we will send you an invitation to join our other writing workshop. Before we start the event, allow me to introduce Asia Pacific Journal of Elections and Democracy, or APJED. APJED is a new journal managed by Perludem and Joko Sutono Research Center of Universitas Indonesia, and it published twice a year. We get support from IDEA and also from USAID. And APJED aims to be an inclusive forum for researchers, practitioners, activists to develop collective knowledge on issues related to elections and democratization in Asia Pacific. Members of the editorial board and of APJED and APJED reviewers they come from various universities and think tanks in the United States, Japan, Australia, Indonesia, with various disciplinary backgrounds to maintain the quality of articles published in APJED. So currently, APJED is looking for contributors to write for the journal for the volume 2, issue 2, which will be published in December. So please send your manuscript by 30 September at the latest. And if you're interested to write for APJED, please visit APJED's website at www.apjed.org or email us at journal@perludem.org. You can also read and download APJED's articles for free. So feel free to visit our website and download the articles. Okay, that's about APJED. For today's webinar, we are really grateful that Dr. Andres Uffen has been kindly willing to share his insights based on his experience as the co-editor of the Journal of Current Southeast Asian Affairs, a prestigious journal published by Giga Germany. If you're working on political parties in Southeast Asia or Indonesian politics, you must have encountered Dr. Uffen's names because he published so many influential articles on those topics. One of my all-time favorites is his article on politik aliran and Filipinization of Indonesia's politics, which brilliantly captures the early dynamics of Indonesian political parties in the post-Suharto era, and it can explain why we are seeing waning loyalties towards political parties, increasing reliance on money politics, and most importantly, how the new local elites, including political families, become more influential in Indonesia's political landscape. That's just one example of his many brilliant works on politics and political parties. And other than his current role as the co-editor of the Journal of Southeast Asian Affairs, Dr. Uffen is now the spokesperson of the research team Democratic Institutions, and he served as a professor of political science at the Friedrich Alexander Universität Erlangen-Nuremberg, and served also as a visiting professor at University of the Philippines, Diliman. He received his PhD in political science from University of Hamburg and his MA in political science from University of Berlin. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Andres Uffen. And Dr. Uffen, the session is yours.
Yeah, thanks very much, Hughes, for the nice introduction.
Yes, I would like to start. May I see the presentation? So I don't see the presentation just now.
No.
I have to.
You can share your screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just wait a second. Everybody can see, yeah. So I had some email communication with Hughes before, and he formulated a few questions that could lead my presentation today. For example, what are the basic elements that make a manuscript worth going to the review process? What are the common mistakes I, as an editor, usually encounter? What kind of articles are usually published? When do we demand minor or major revisions? How does such a review process works usually? What are the reviewers looking for in a journal manuscript? How long does it take to publish a paper? And at the end, what are the most read, downloaded articles, for example? So I'm Hughes already mentioned it, or one of the three editors of the Journal of Current Southeast Asian Affairs. That's a journal that is published by JIGA, the institute I'm working for in Hamburg, Germany, the German Institute for Global and Area Studies. And within this JIGA, there's an Institute for Asian Studies, and I'm a senior research fellow at this institute. And this Asian Studies Institute always had a journal on Southeast Asian politics, but it started in the 1980s as a German language journal under the name Südostasien Aktuell, and it was only a journal that would report on things going on in all the 10, 11, at that time, I think 10 Southeast Asian countries in German, and, well, not a referee journal, but the whole content was produced by, at the time, the 3-4 research fellows at the Asian Institute working on Southeast Asia. And I also, for a few years, would write in German on politics in Indonesia and Malaysia with small reports, small pieces of analysis. And then because of all these global developments, also within political science and area studies, we started to publish at least parts of the contents in English around 2000 and I think 6 or 7. And within a few stages, we had a transition towards this kind of journal where everything is published in English. That was not easy at the beginning because most of us would usually write in German. I also wrote my PhD dissertation and my so-called Habilitation, another dissertation in German, and that was mostly the case in Germany at that time. But we were forced, like many Southeast Asians and Indonesians nowadays too, to write in English and to write for so-called referee journals. That means journals that have a review process with referees from outside. So we transformed this formerly German language journal into an English journal under this name, Journal of Current Southeast Asian Affairs. And we also started review processes with outside referees. That was a very long process that took many years, and it was not easy, I have to admit. At that time, the journal was published by the University of Hamburg still. But then a few years ago, I think it was in 2018 or 19, I'm not that sure, we started to cooperate with Sage, the British publisher, and not only this Journal of Current Southeast Asian Affairs, but also 3 other giga journals on Latin America, on China, Journal of Current Chinese Affairs, and then there's one journal on Africa. Africa Spectrum, I think is the name. So we have 4 area studies journals, and we all work together with Sage. And I think the cooperation was quite successful, because now we are listed in the so-called Social Science Citation Index, the SSCI. We have an impact factor, and we have now much more submissions than 5 or 10 years ago. Just today, we received the 108th submission this year, and last year we had, I think, even more than 200 submissions. And finally, over a period of 12 months, we publish around 20 articles in 3 issues. That means every issue comprises around 6-7 research articles and maybe 1, 2, 3 book reviews. So the acceptance rate is quite low. Yeah, last year we got more than 200 submissions and we published around 20. So that would only be 10%. So why is it such a low acceptance rate? I will talk about that later, about the usual mistakes we see and what could be improved from the side of those who submit papers. So I'm now using a few slides that you can find at the Sage homepage. I think it is here, Sage PubCom sites default. You can get the presentation via use later on if you want to get that. So I'm using this these slides by Sage, and I will add a few things. So I will not talk a lot about this. You write your article, you submit it, then there will be the review by outside referees, but we start the review process only if we, the editors, think that the quality of the paper is good and there's a really good chance that the paper will be accepted. So if we get 100 submissions, we will desk reject. That means immediately reject, I think, around maybe 70 articles. Yeah, so 70% will be rejected immediately because maybe the English language is not that good, and we are not able to handle this process of proofreading, developmental proofreading. It's not only about the grammar and things like that, but it's also about the style and about the quality of the language in general. Yeah, it has to be a paper that is really well written, and I think usually you need professional native speakers who help to polish the paper. We at Giga also have 2 or 3 language editors. Yeah, and if we want to publish an article, we send them to these 2 or 3 people, and they will correct quite a lot of things, and then we rewrite, and then we submit our papers to referee journals. So even after having written for 10, 15 years articles in English, we still need this kind of help by a professional native speaker proofreaders. Yeah? And I think that's maybe the most common mistake, that especially those who come from Southeast Asian or Asian countries and submit, and that they don't have this service of professional proofreading, because it is also sometimes quite expensive. And if the university or if the institute you're working for does not have this service, you have, maybe pay for yourself, and that could be a bit expensive. Yeah, but there are also, of course, scholars who are able to write directly and who do not need this service. Or maybe you have friends, native speaker friends, but this is the main hindrance usually with respect to submissions to our journal. I think at least a third of the papers are not good enough in terms of language. So if the article seems to be very good, and I will talk about these quality indicators later, we start the review process. That means we send the paper to 2 or 3, sometimes 4, but usually 2 or 3 outside referees. That means people who are very knowledgeable about the topic, mostly from Southeast Asia or from Australia or the US, sometimes from Europe. And they usually need 1 to 3 months to write a report. And well, then we have the 2 reports, and there are different options: reject or accept with minor revisions or major revisions. And in most cases, you will get something in between. Let's say 2 referees, and one says minor revisions and the other says major revisions. And then we send the paper back to the author or authors and ask him or her to address the weaknesses that have been pinpointed at by the referee. If we have 2 times major revisions, we may think that it will not work because there are too many revisions and the whole paper has to be rewritten from scratch. Then we reject it immediately. I think of those papers who will go through the review process, we at the end accept maybe half of them or a bit less, depends. Yeah. But if you are in this review process, the chances to getting the acceptance is quite good. And then after it is accepted, there will be a kind of copy editing by Sage. That means they will revise here and there a little bit. It's more about formatting, not about proofreading. A little bit proofreading, but usually this has to be done by the author himself or herself. And then if it is fully accepted and copy edited and so on, we will publish it online first. That's what most journals nowadays do, because otherwise it could take 1 or 2 years before it is published, and then it's maybe outdated. So we publish online first, sometimes a few weeks after the paper had been submitted. And well, a few months later, it will be also published offline. That means in the journal itself, in paper form, the printed publication. So I can go through these different questions or problems that could arise. And I'm, as I said, referring to these Sage slides that are also on the internet. So if you have written the paper, you would usually try to find the right journal. I mean, this is maybe the most important part of your work. And usually, if you are more experienced, you start to write your article and you already have 2 or 3 journals in mind. Yeah, you just do not write and then you start to look at what kind of journal would be the most adequate. But that's what I did always the last few times. I already knew I want to publish this one in Pacific Affairs or Democratization or Asian Survey. And then you know how many words you have to write and what these journals want to see. If you submit to Democratization, for example, it's political science, and it's not so much about area studies, data, and so on. It's more about crafting a political science related argument and use maybe Indonesia or Malaysia as a case study. But if you submit to, let's say, Pacific Affairs, it's also maybe political science, sociology, whatever, but it's more area studies oriented. Yeah? So this is very important. And also, you have to look at how prestigious the journal is. If you have something that seems to be quite interesting, but is not, well, a world-class paper, then you, of course, submit to a lower-ranked journal. I don't want to name them now, but if you think it's brilliant, then you go to the highest ranked journals, of course. I mean, it depends on where you work. If you work at a university in Australia or the US or in most European countries, you have to publish with so-called A and B journals, SSCI listed journals, yeah, Social Science Citation Index. In Southeast Asia, it's more about Scopus, I think. It has to be a Scopus journal and then maybe Q1 or Q2 or something like that. So you have to look at that, of course. So it's very important to know at an early stage, where do I want to publish my paper? And you have to see what the editors usually want to see, and you have to look at the journal. What kind of articles did they publish so far? Does my paper fit into the scope of the journal? Strangely, our journal often gets submissions from South Asia, for example, Bangladesh, Pakistan, on party politics in Sri Lanka, whatever. And I always have to tell them, no, we are only covering Southeast Asia. Yeah, and Southeast Asia is defined in a very specific way. Look into our journal. So very often, I mean, maybe 20 times a year, we get articles from South Asia, I don't know. Or we get articles by economists with a lot of statistics. And then I also tell them, no, that's not what we publish. Yeah. So you have to look very carefully at the scope of the journal and what they have published so far. That's most important. Yeah. And you can, of course, not submit one paper to different journals at the same time, only one journal. And then if you are rejected maybe 2 times, I think it's very difficult to submit it again to another journal, because then you will get the same referees. And I'm also often working as a referee, and I had this experience a few times that I have got the same paper from different journals, again and again. And then I tell them, no, I already rejected it with the other journal. So this is important, to find the right venue, the right journal. Then about your paper itself, just let me have a look what other questions They are posing, what should you do to prepare your manuscript? Yeah, okay, you have to read the manuscript submission guidelines, of course, that's what I've said. You have to use the right references, yeah, Harvard or Vancouver, whatever, the word limit. Conventions of academic writing, I can talk about that later. The title, abstract keywords, I think these are elementary things. I would not really try to talk about that. Which journal should you submit to? I already talked about it. Read the journal's aims and scope. Yeah, I think this is quite clear. Conventions of academic writing. Yeah, okay, well, what do we expect from a journal article? We expect that it has to show something that is new, that is challenging, a challenging new argument. This is what we usually would like to see. If you, for example, write about, and that's my favorite subject, about the party system in Indonesia, and about coalition building now before the 2024 elections, for example, and you ask, or you want to describe which kind of coalitions have been built, and there are grand coalitions in Indonesia usually, and why is this the case, something like that. If you do that, you cannot just refer to old articles and repeat the old argument that you have a kind of cartel. Because of that, you have grand coalitions, and you have a cartel because there's an oligarchy, and the political elites in Indonesia try to fend off the opposition, and they all work together in order to guarantee the spoils of office, something like that. This is the usual argument by Hardis and Winters and Mietzner and Espinel and so on. But if you want to add onto this kind of literature, you have to find something new. For example, a challenging argument could be that the cartel theory by Slater and Ambardi and others does not work any longer, or that the oligarchy thesis is okay, but it has to be transformed somehow. Yeah, it's only the beginning of a kind of new literature on oligarchy, that there's something specific about the oligarchy in recent years, maybe something like that. That would be a challenging argument, yeah? And then you would structure your whole paper according to the argument. I think the argument is at the core of your whole paper, and then in the abstract, you write down what's so challenging about your argument. You would write, usually we think that oligarchy is this and this and this in Indonesia, but I argue that in reality, the oligarchy is something else, and there are other reasons for forming this kind of cartel, something like that. And that means in the abstract, the argument, the challenging argument is at the core. And again, in the introduction, you write about, well, Indonesian party politics. There has been written a lot by A and B and C and D, and the usual argument is this and this, but I want to add to this literature and try to show that this and this is the case. And then you start with an analysis of the debate in the literature. That's very important. Yeah, this is very often lacking. People just start with their argument or with their description, after a short introduction, but you have to situate your article and your argument within the usually political science literature. I mean, our journal is mostly focused on political science or political science related topics. It could also be economic or sociological, but there always has to be something about politics in Southeast Asia. So this is very often lacking a very good literature review. And literature review does not mean that you just repeat what other people's have already written, yeah. But a very good literature review is characterized by the ability of the author to look at those articles and their arguments that are directly connected to your own paper and argument. You have to show that there's this kind of debate and that you are referring to this debate and that you are also formulating something that is maybe in contrast to one of the main themes that are that are repeated within political science or area studies debates. Yeah, this is very difficult, and but very important at the same time. And then there are different kinds of articles. I think there are those that have very good empirical material. Yeah, for example, you have material about political party candidates in 20 different provinces, hundreds of candidates, and where they come from. Then the paper is more driven by this kind of very good empirical material. But there has also to be a connection to political science debates and as I said, to an argument that is somehow new. But other articles are more driven by theoretical work, I would say. Maybe the empirical material is not that new, or you use data from VDEM or Freedom House or whatever, not really new and not generated by yourself. But if the theoretical base of your argument is of very high quality and is also something new, then it is also possible to write something like this. Yeah. So I think if we as editors look at a submitted paper, we first look at, of course, at the title. Is it interesting? Yeah. And then the abstract. Sometimes authors are not very clear in their abstracts, or they think abstracts are not important because it's only for libraries or something like that. No, the abstract is very important. If the abstract is nonsensical, or if the abstract is without any contents, without argument, then we are tending to desk reject the paper. But of course, we also look into the paper. The introduction and conclusions are also very important. That's where we look at the beginning. And well, in many cases, maybe half of the papers, we look at the abstract, the intro, the conclusions, and we immediately see there's almost nothing. It's not new, it's not challenging, and we cannot publish this paper. So these parts are very important. Yeah, what else? I think in the question and answer part, I can go into more detail. Also with reference to methodology and theory. So what else? Have you provided a cover letter? Is not important to us. Have you read it before submitting? Of course, as I said, very important. Has permission been obtained? Copyright, yeah, you have to look at this too. Conclusions, yeah, do not merely repeat results. Yeah, I mean, it's not clear how to write these conclusions. Sometimes you really only repeat the results, and that's maybe not so bad. You also should go beyond the evidence, yeah, future research. You can do that, yeah, go beyond the evidence and reflect upon what you have written about, maybe point at some possible weaknesses or where more research is to be done. Yeah, you can do that, but that's maybe not that important. Let me go to the next slide. Yeah, 2 to 4 reviewers. As I said, we usually have 2 or 3. In most cases, desk reject. That means immediately reject. And you can then not submit again. If it is rejected, it's over. You have to find another journal. Sometimes authors do not submit, but do send me maybe at least the abstract and ask, could it be that your journal is generally interested in this subject? Yeah, something like that. And then I would answer, yeah, okay, or no, absolutely not. So this also helps maybe not to be desk rejected. And I have to say, if you are desk rejected, it's not a failure or something like that. That's quite normal, and maybe it's just the wrong journal. Yeah, but it is not always the judgment of the quality of the paper. Sometimes papers are really good, but nevertheless they are desk rejected because they don't fit into the scopus. Very often you get major revisions, but there are also, of course, differences. Sometimes major revisions means you have to restructure the whole paper and you have to write essentially a new paper. Sometimes major revisions only means you have to address 10, 15 different points, but they are all doable. Yeah, I had last year a paper with many revisions, but I could handle that within a few days' time, and it was okay. Yeah, not so difficult. And sometimes as an author, you see major revisions demanded by 2 reviewers, and you already see this will be very, very difficult because sometimes reviewers demand different things. And sometimes reviewers want you to come up with a slightly different argument and to present other case studies in addition and things like that. This could be sometimes very problematic. And sometimes you get 2 times major revisions and you decide, no, I will stop it here with this journal. It makes no sense. Conditional accept with minor revisions is, of course, very good. Then you have made it almost. And accept without change, I think this almost never happens. I think I have had one case where both reviewers said, no revisions, just publish it. I don't will name the author, but this happened, I think, once in many, many years. You will usually always have to do these revisions. When can or should I contact the editor? You can always contact me or my colleagues, Marco Bünte, for example. But don't contact me if you can find the answers on the website. I mean, most questions are answered on the website. When and where do you have to submit, word limits and all this. Yeah. But if it's about the content of the article, for example, then we are always happy to answer your questions. Handling revisions and rejections. I mean, some of you may sometimes write as a referee. You may write reviews for journals. And if you do that, you know that it is very difficult to write a very good referee report, because you have to read the paper very carefully, and then you have to tell the author what he or she should do in order to improve the paper. And that means you should have a lot of experience in writing papers, and you should be able to direct the author into the right direction. Very, very good referee reports are written in order to really improve the paper in a way that it is much better than before. And I myself had this experience many times. I submitted papers and I got referee reports, and in most cases, these reports were really good and really helped me to improve the paper. Sometimes the reports are not at all helpful, but in most cases they are. So, and if you have to address the criticisms of the referee, you of course have to be polite, and usually you write, it's great what the referee has said, it helps me a lot, and so on. And then you have to answer point by point what you have done in order to improve your article. And this is very important. If you rewrite a paper and resubmit, then you usually write a few pages and explain in detail what you have done, why you have put in some other material, and how you have addressed this or that. And this takes a lot of time. Sometimes you need a few weeks to revise your paper, especially if they demand major revisions. It's a very important part. Okay, handling rejections, don't overreact, of course. It makes no sense to then criticize the editors or the referees. I mean, my papers were also often rejected, and even this helps to learn. Especially if you get really harsh reviews by referees. That's what I experienced a few times. That could be a very bad experience at the beginning, but then after a few days you realize, yeah, maybe the referee is really right. Maybe my whole argument does not make sense. And then, well, you are more careful when you submit papers afterwards. You read your paper again and again, and revise it, because you already know what referees might say. You already see what kind of weaknesses there are, and you address it by yourself. So sometimes you get rejected. You see what is wrong with your paper, but nevertheless you can rewrite it and then submit to another journal. Maybe a year or 2 years later, I have submitted papers that I wrote maybe 5 years ago. Then you have to update and rewrite. That's also often the case. So yeah, then you asked me which kind of articles are most read or most cited in our journals. And I had a look yesterday. I think these are the articles that, the most quoted articles in the last 3, 4, 5 years. You can find it at Google Scholar. It's here written at the end. And the most popular, I think most cited article is the one by Markus Mietzner. It has been cited, I cannot see it here now, I think 89 times. Then there was one on general elections in Malaysia, 61 times. I mean, the number in dark is the number of quotations, 61 times. And then resurgence of ideology, Fossati, Philippines COVID-19 response, a lot on Malaysia and the Philippines. I will come to that later. I think here the articles most read in the journal in the last 6 months is mostly about the Philippines. Hapal, Philippines COVID-19 response. Mulder is a very, very old article, but still very often read by readers. And then again, Harpal and Jensen on police violence in the Philippines, economic growth in the Philippines. Eva Lotta's article is also very old, also on the Philippines. Ronald Holmes, something about the Philippines. Julio Tihanki, factional dynamics. Then one on Singapore, again, Philippines, Malaysia, Mark Thompson on Duterte. And then only one on more general on Southeast Asia and the South China Sea. So if you ask me what kinds of articles are often cited or often read, it's difficult to say. I mean, the Mietzner article was on COVID-19 response, and he submitted it and we published it online a few weeks later. So it was really up to date, and maybe because of that, it was up to date and it was published a few weeks after it was written, and he even updated it shortly before it was published online first. That was, I think, very important. And then the number 2 on Malaysia. This was part of a special issue. We usually have once a year one special issue. That means an issue on only one specific topic. And this was on the 14th general elections in Malaysia. And special issues are quite popular, I would say, especially on elections. Maybe we will have one on the elections in Indonesia in 24. I think that would be also a popular one. We had one on the Philippine elections, I think, a lot on populism also. That was popular. Populism is very popular in political science nowadays. So I think articles on countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos are not so often read, simply because not so many scientists work on these countries. I think articles on the Philippines are often downloaded because there's a huge political science community in the Philippines. Whereas in Indonesia, many scientists, I guess, are still more oriented towards Bahasa Indonesia articles, I think. Whereas in Malaysia and the Philippines, the English language is much more influential within political science. It is less so in Indonesia. But I think this very dynamically is changing the last few years, also because political scientists in Indonesia nowadays have to write for English journals. That's what I have heard, Scopus journals especially. So yeah, I think that's it. And I would be very happy to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Andreas, for sharing your insights as the editor. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. You can write down on the chat box, or you can unmute yourself. Uh, Feel free to raise your hand also. Any questions, everyone? And before I forget, kindly fill the form to record your attendance and to get your e-certificate later. Maybe just following on your previous explanation, Andreas, what should the authors do if the reviews from the 2 or 3 reviewers are conflicting? How should they deal with that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah. Yeah, what did I do? I think there are recommendations by the referees that really make sense, and I would usually follow these recommendations. And if I see that um, this is conflicting with recommendations by other referees, I would in detail describe or explain why um, why there are, or that there are, conflicting um, recommendations, and that I have to address at least some of them, and that I have chosen to address only recommendations A and B and not C and D because they are conflicting, something like that. But I would also always try to address all these demanded revisions. Yeah, maybe you could find a way in between to reconcile the referees, but it's not very often the case. I would say I've had that once or twice. But if you explain in detail why you have rewritten your paper in a specific way, then they usually will understand. No, but once I had this experience with a journal where I had 4 different reviewers, and one of the reviewers was very strange, and I did not really know what he or she wanted me to do. That this was a very bad referee report, actually. So I more or less uh, did not address what was said in this referee report, and finally the paper was rejected. I mean, sometimes
Yes.
there's no way out.
Is it possible if the review is not too clear to seek clarification from editors?
I have to admit I never have done that. Yeah,
Okay.
no, and I never have had this experience also as an editor. Usually, no, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Thanks, Andreas. Any questions? We got some aspiring scholars here with us today. We have
Yeah,
Zara.
that's what I wanted to ask you. Are most people here online are students, or did they already finish their studies? Are they already writing papers for different journals? Have
Yeah.
they published articles? That would
Uh,
be
s-
interesting.
yeah.
And I would ask you, I mean, because we have many submissions from Indonesia. I think
Yeah.
maybe 30 to 40% of our submitted papers are actually from Indonesia. And I'm very interested to get many papers. I mean, what do you think, especially about the language problem? I know that it is very difficult to write almost perfect English. I'm also not able to do that, and that usually in Indonesia you don't get professional native speakers. Yeah, so you are on your own, and yeah, for many Indonesians, it's simply impossible to write in English and yeah, just to submit. So, what's your experience, for example? That would be interesting. Use or
Yeah.
somebody else.
So we got some PhD students with us today. I know Zara, Bang Tore, and maybe some other students. If you have any questions or you would like to share your experience,
No.
feel free to unmute yourself. Or yeah, but from my experience, I think it's there's Widya. Yep.
Can you hear my voice? Well,
Yes.
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 thank you. Thank you, Andres, for your very interesting presentation. It's very clear actually. But I have one question. You earlier mentioned that uh, an immediate rejection. Is that what you called a rejection?
Yep.
Or something else, or two
No,
different
no,
things?
it's actually the same. Yeah. So as I
Okay.
said, maybe no.
Earlier you mentioned that 70% are like immediately rejected based on its language consideration. Is it
Not only.
like, oh, not only?
No. I just
Is it like
rejected a few. Yeah. Sorry.
the initial rejection based on the language consideration? Is it like a default rules for like social science journals, or like maybe the other like one specific, like every journal have its own like specific rules to like immediately reject the journals that the papers that they accepted? And secondly, I have another question coming up. How about the novelty? Because some journals are like they have like very generic topic, and well, in my opinion, they tend to like accept like a lot of papers write generally. For instance, the journal on legal pluralism, like legal pluralism is like a very generic broad topic, and many scholars tend to like submit something similar to one another. How about that novelty consideration to the
Mm.
journals? Thank you. That's my question.
Okay. Yeah. Immediately reject and desk reject is the same. And just this week, I think I rejected immediately 3 papers, and they were not that bad. I mean, in terms of English, at least 2 of the 3 were very good, actually. Yeah. But in one case, the word limit was not okay, and it was not really novel. I mean, I thought I have read something like that a few times before. And the other one, I don't give names, has written a kindred paper before, but just on one country, and now he or she has covered 2 countries, but the argument was more or less the same. And then I thought, no, that's too easy. I think sometimes it's too easy. That's not really novel. But how many manuscripts are rejected because the language is not okay? Maybe half of them, yeah, maybe 50%, and then another maybe 20% because, yeah, as I said, there's no novel argument, and I do not really know what to do with this kind of article. But this is very different with other journals. Sometimes I, as a referee, get articles or papers from other journals, and I think we would immediately reject this. Yeah? So I have to write a referee and then reject. And we are desk rejecting also in order to reduce work. Yeah, if we start a review process that takes sometimes 4 or 5 months, and you have to write to the referees many times, and they don't answer. I just now have this case with one Indonesian referee, and I think I have written 5, 6, 7 times, and he said, yes, I will send the referee report. But again, I have to write later another email to ask him to write the referee. So in order to reduce this kind of work, we are quite critical, I would say. Yeah, I wouldn't know about other journals. I think that the top journals, yeah, like Journal of Contemporary Asia or Democratization or so on, they are also very, very critical, and they will reject a lot. Your other question was on the novelty, and the Journal on Legal Pluralism publishes a lot of kindred articles, something like that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is always a problem. We have a lot on populism in the Philippines, for example, on Duterte. Yeah, I think last year maybe 10 articles were submitted on all kinds of populism-related papers, especially on Duterte. And in many cases, we thought, yeah, it's a good paper, but it has been covered by T. Henke and Thompson and Curato and so on. So it is not really that novel or challenging. Yeah. So it's of course good if you find a niche, yeah, something really new and something that has not been covered by the literature. For example, a few weeks ago, we had a submission on the Ombudsman institution in Indonesia. And then I looked and found that there's no really high quality article on the Ombudsman institution. So something like this would be really interesting. Yeah, if you find a niche. Yeah, I hope I have answered your question. I'm not quite sure, but there's another question.
Zara?
Hi. So thank you for your presentation. It's a topic that I'm always very anxious about, so it's certainly very helpful. Thank you. My question is about your experience with trying to publish a paper that's a bit of this field and a bit of that field. So for example, if you're collaborating with scholars from a different field. So for example, I'm a sociologist, then I'm working with a political scientist or say an economist. Have you been rejected in one and tried in another field, or what is your strategy? What is the best approach? Which one would you aim first? So like, is it going with field A first and going general first, or going with a specific niche in field A first, then aiming to be general in the second, or maybe like you should just like aim for specific right on? Obviously what you need to weigh in is that of course you want to publish in high impact journals first, but in regards to like specific and niche and the different fields that might not necessarily be adjacent, what is the best approach? Thank you.
Thank you, Zara. And before I forgot, Mbak Widya, do you have any follow-up questions on Andreas' response?
No, it's clear enough for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yes, Andreas, please.
Yeah, okay. If scholars from different fields come together, sociologists, economists, political scientists, historians, that's okay. I mean, that's could even be better, because maybe then you will be able to find a niche, because different disciplines are coming together and find something new. I think we are always interested in that, and it's not the case that always political scientists submit papers. We often have a mix of different authors with different backgrounds, but in terms of the strategy of publication, it's very difficult to say. I think the most important thing is you should have a feeling for the quality of your paper. Is it really publishable in one of the top journals of the discipline or in area studies, or is it more a good paper but not that outstanding. That's most important. I mean, if you have a good paper and you try to publish in an excellent journal, it will probably be rejected. Yeah, but sometimes pursue the strategy of starting at the top and then go down step by step. But to an extent, this is possible. But usually I wouldn't do that if the paper is good, but not really very good. Yeah, so I would start with B journals. And then the question is, do you try to find an area studies journal or more a journal located in a specific discipline? That, of course, also depends on your article. Yeah, if it is hardcore political science, for example, then okay, try to find a political science journal. But it is, or if you are looking for an audience mostly of people interested in Indonesia or the Philippines, then maybe area studies journals would be better. Yeah, I think you will get a feeling of that after you have submitted many times. So after a few years, you know where you can publish and where you cannot publish. That's also the reason why at the beginning you get many rejections. I think that's the normal case. If you are at an early stage of your career, you will have this somehow disappointing experience that many papers are rejected, but that's normal. And then you know after a few years which journals are too difficult and which are much easier. Yeah, but I cannot say in general what kind of strategy is the best one in this regard. Yeah, you have to find out, and as I said, you have to look at the profile of the journal and what they have published so far, for example. Yeah.
And sometimes I think we kind of know which journal because we read that journal. I mean, we cite that journal. So I think that could be a good signpost also, right?
Yeah. So yeah, and a journal that I like is, for example, Journal of Contemporary Asia, but they also aim more at articles that are quite critical, are maybe more a bit leftist, yeah, something like that. So this also plays a role sometimes. Or I like comparative politics very much, but this is hardcore political science and you need some empirical material, but it's mostly about the argument and the crafting of an argument. And that's really very difficult. So this is a very specific audience then.
Yeah. Thanks, Andreas. Zara, any follow-up question?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Zara. And next we have Celso Fonseca. Celso. Hi, Celso. Celso, you can unmute yourself. Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Great.
Yeah. Andreas, thank you very much. I'm Celso Fonseca from Timor-Leste. Actually, I'm students, but also at this moment I'm working at the university and the newly Human Rights Center. And I saw that Perludem here in 2021 we contribute to the first journal of the Democratic Journal. And when I note that a lot of interesting things that you share, I just wonder that what about your experience about scholars from Timor-Leste? Because there are a lot of interesting topics that maybe also good to submit to your journal, but what is the most challenges that you have experienced with Timorese?
We do not have many submissions from East Timor, actually. We would like to get much more, and we only had a few papers published on Timor-Leste. I remember one on Timor-Leste's foreign policy by a Turkish scholar. And then we had a special issue on factionalism, party factionalism, and one article on factionalism within Timorese parties by, I think, a Portuguese scholar. But I think that was all we got. We would like to get more from Timor-Leste. And most articles on Timor-Leste are not written by people from the country itself, but as I said, in this case, from Europe. So, well, it's a very small country, and I think political science is still developing with one university in Dili. So I cannot really talk about experiences with Timorese scholars we had, but I think the experiences would be more or less the same we had with Indonesian scholars. The problem is maybe that internationally or globally, not so many people are interested in Timor-Leste. I mean, in terms of readers. If we publish articles on Timor-Leste, there will not be so many citations and not be so many readers attracted to this article. This is a problem for journals who would like to get a very high impact factor. That's also maybe one overall problem of the whole scenery of journals. It's all about being ranked within Scopus and the Social Science Citation Index, and it's about the impact factor. And the impact factor is a result of the number of specific citations, articles that have been published in your journal have got. So if there are many citations within a specific period of time, you get a high impact factor. So we have now an impact factor of 1.89 for the years 21 and 22. And well, this is only because some of the around 40 articles we have published are often cited. So this can change easily. And because of that, editors aim at articles that probably will be quoted many times. But this is in itself very problematic, because then people from Timor-Leste will be disadvantaged, and editors are tending to publish paper with attractive titles, populism in the Philippines, that will be read also by people who are interested in general populism, or COVID-19 in Southeast Asia, or China's role in the South China Sea. This attracts readers and quotations, and all these articles that focus on very small niches are or will get difficulties to be published. And this is a general problem within social science and within this circus of social science journals. But this is something that I have realized only now, after we have got our first impact factor. And now we as editors start to think about that. What kind of strategies do we have to develop in order to get a higher impact factor? And that's essentially not very good. There are other excellent journals with low impact factors, but they only have low impact factors maybe because of their very high quality, because they publish articles on something in 19th century Vietnam. Yeah, very well written articles, but of course not many readers. So the whole ranking of journals and the production of impact factors is in itself, I would say, at least problematic. No?
Thank you, Andres. Another alternative is to send your article to APJED, and we'll be very happy to
Yeah, that's a
review
good last option.
your article as long as it's again as long as it's fits to the aims and scope of the journal. Yeah.
I mean, the other problem is that you have to write in English. I wrote until I was 41 only in German, because I like the German language, and I don't need a proofreader in German. And well, the political science community in Germany is quite large, or the Asian studies community, but well, I have to write in English. And also in Indonesia, for example, Indonesians now have to write in English, but that also means a devaluation of Bahasa Indonesia and of all the journals in Bahasa Indonesia and books. That's very problematic. And I think that many scholars, for example, in Indonesia, especially the older ones who have always published papers in Bahasa, don't like the whole system. And I can, of course, understand it, because the whole system is not fair. Because the native speakers in English have such advantages. Such big advantages. And of course, those people from Southeast Asian countries who have or have had the opportunity and the privilege to study in Australia or the US or Singapore, maybe. It's not fair, actually, but well,
Yeah.
that's life.
Yeah. So thank you, Andres. And next, and Celso, do you have any follow-up question?
It's okay. Thank you. You're Andreas. You're very honest. So this is also the challenge for us, but hopefully all editors like you can find the best strategy to promote Timor-Leste as a very new scholars and societies and independence country. Yeah, that's I hope that happens in the years coming.
Yeah, and actually Timor-Leste is a very interesting case study in many respects, because it's a very small country. It's quite easy to conduct interviews within a few days with many people in Dili, for example. And I mean, it's not, if you talk in terms of political science and about specific subjects of political science, the size of a country or the number of inhabitants or something like that is not very important. It's about the argument and about what the case of Timor-Leste tells us about the evolution of party systems or the quality of democracy or semi-presidentialism and so on. So actually, we need much more literature on Timor-Leste. I'm waiting on that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Andres. Thank you, Pak Celso. And Bang Tore? Hello, Bang Tore. You can unmute yourself. Yes.
Hi. Hi, Yos. Hi, Andreas.
Hello.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation and also explanations. I'm working on the topic of negative campaigning in Indonesia, and I think I cited a lot your journals and also your the articles you wrote about professionalization of election in Indonesia. I have two questions. The first one is, how do you decide who review which journals or articles? That's number one. The second question is, I would suggest, I would imagine that the key factor for acceptance is a contribution to the literature.
Yeah.
We have learned what sort of contribution that may arise from any research. I would suggest that this research has been done in that area, and in this area, in this location, context has never been done before. I think that will not be included as a contribution. From the perspective of an editor, how would you like to see, I mean, how would you define significant contribution in an article in your journal or and beyond? I think that's all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bang Tore. And I think, yeah, I also have similar question to Bang Tore. How would you match the manuscript and the reviewer, Andreas? Thanks.
Okay,
sorry, I'm so sorry. I missed one point. Particularly when it comes to the contribution, particularly when we are working on area studies, like you pointed a little bit before. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, very good question. For example, if you write something about negative campaigning in the 2024 elections, what kind of reviewers would I try to find? Well, I usually would go to Google Scholar and see who has written on campaigning in Indonesia, or negative campaigning in Indonesia, or on negative campaigning in general in another country. So it depends on what you are focusing on in your paper. If you try to contribute to the literature on election campaigning in Indonesia, then I would find a reviewer who works especially on Indonesia and knows the literature. If you want to contribute to the negative campaigning literature at large, I would try to find somebody, at least one, who writes about negative campaigning in general, but knows maybe nothing about Indonesia, because these people then only look at the theory and would be able to judge whether this is really new, what you write on negative campaigning. And if it's more a area studies article, then the Indonesian or Indonesia scholars would be able to make a very good judgment. So sometimes it's quite easy to find reviewers, especially on political parties campaigning and so on. There are quite a lot. We often get submissions on, for example, foreign policy of Indonesia. And the problem is that there are not so many people who could be referees, because there is not that much literature. It's expanding in recent years, surprisingly. That shows that Indonesians are catching up quickly. But at the end, you have maybe 7, 8, 9 people. And I always ask them, would you like to be a referee? And I would like to have more potential referees in some, or with reference to some topics. And sometimes I do not really know much about the topic. Yeah, if there's something about whatever trade policy in Malaysia or something like that, I really have to start from scratch and try to find the right one. And of course, I also do not really know whether there's a contribution to the literature. I mean, in many cases, I don't know. And because of that, I ask the reviewers to do that kind of work for me. So this was the first question: who reviews? How do I find the reviewers? Via Google Scholar, or because I simply know them? Many of them I know personally, and I know he or she will send the review within a few weeks. And then after many years, I'm responsible for this journal since 2011. After 11 years, I already know who could be a good reviewer. Online, when I write down the reviewers via our online system, at the end, if we get the referee reports, we are asked as editors how helpful was the review, and then you have to put 1, 2, or 3. 1 is very helpful, very good. 3 is not really helpful. So sometimes you have referees who write only a few lines and it does not help you at all, and then I will usually not ask these people again because I know that makes no sense. But others are very clear, write a lot, and are really helpful. I always try to find these kind of referees. But of course, many people do not like to be referees. I would also include myself because it's a lot of work, at least a few hours. And well, you do not really get, well, you don't have much advantages to be a referee. Yeah, maybe the only advantage is if the editor knows you, it's easier then afterwards to submit a paper, and maybe you have better chances that your article will be accepted because there's already some kind of connection to the editor. Yeah, at least a little bit. This is the only advantage I see. So it has to be a contribution to the literature, that's right. And in terms of negative campaigning in Indonesia, what could be a contribution to the literature? That's very difficult to say. Do we learn something new about political parties? Maybe. Or is it about presidential elections? We have seen the polarization in 2014 and 2019. So negative campaigning could be interesting, but then you have to come up with a kind of theoretical frame. So I would frame it with reference to the populism literature, and then ask, maybe the question would be, is populism always connected to negative campaigning, like in the US, when there was a lot of negative campaigning towards Clinton, for example, Hillary Clinton? Yeah, that was negative campaigning. And that's what right-wing populist parties do in Europe, all over Europe, negative campaigning to an extent. So the question is it maybe a bit different in Indonesia because of this mufakat and musyawarah and consensus culture? Yeah. And I think it was a bit difficult in 2019 because Prabowo would not really attack Jokowi, yeah, because Jokowi was simply too popular. So it was a kind of populism with certain restraints and with not so much negative campaigning by the candidates, but the negative campaigning took maybe place on the internet. So there are many questions. What kind of negative campaigning against the background of Indonesian culture and of the cartel of political parties? Is there a difference of negative campaigning in parliamentary and presidential elections? Probably yes, because there's a cartel of parties, but of course not a cartel of candidates. Maybe populism in Indonesia is somehow different from what we usually think about populism. So many questions, and it's quite easy to situate these questions and the argument you develop within the populism literature, but also within the Indonesian politics literature. I think you can find many different angles. Yeah, that's also important. If you write your articles, you have to find at the beginning the best research question. Yeah? Especially when it comes to negative campaigning, you can come up with 10 different arguments and 10 different research questions. And to find the right one, that's maybe the art of writing articles, and it's very difficult to teach. If you talk about very experienced scholars, and maybe during dinner or lunch, you will see that they always think about their next paper, and that they ponder upon what kind of argument would be the best one, and constantly they are pondering upon that, and that makes the very good scholars, I think. And sometimes you need a few years to come up with the best argument. And you have to read a lot. You have to know the whole literature that has been written on a specific subject. Yeah, there are two problems with reference to many, let's say, low quality submissions. Sometimes Indonesians, for example, only or almost only quote Indonesian sources and Indonesian papers, but that, I think that is not possible if you try to publish in English language journals. You have to refer to the political debates written in English and in the top journals. You cannot quote mostly Bahasa journal articles, because nobody knows that outside of Indonesia. Nobody reads that, and well, that's, again, it's an unfair system, but that's the case. And another problem is that often people from the region maybe do find a niche, but they only write about very specific topics. For example, they write about local elections in Semarang or in wherever, in Padang. That's maybe okay within a public, within a special issue, but in general, we would reject it, because we would say maybe elections in Semarang are interesting, but we won't get a wide readership. Nobody who works on the Philippines or Vietnam or whatever would really want to read the article on Semarang. The only exception is when these elections in Semarang are very, very special and tell us a lot about elections in general in Indonesia or in the region. You know? But yeah, this is one of the main problems, that sometimes the topic is too specific. You know?
Great. Thank you, Andres, for your insight. And I think we have come to the end of the session. So thank you once again, Andres. Any final words, tips for the aspiring authors, Andres?
No, I mean, I think I have talked a
Okay,
lot.
then.
Just try to submit a paper, but not too fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes PhD students try to submit at the beginning. No, I think at the end of your time as PhD student. Yeah, because then you have real results, and then you know how to write, and maybe even after you have written your PhD dissertation, then you take a chapter and rewrite it, and something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andres. And thank you once again, everyone, for joining us today. Let's give some applause for Andres, Dr. Andres Uven. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next APJED writing workshop and other APJED writing sessions. And don't forget, before you leave, APJED is looking for contributors. And yeah, please send your paper to APJED before 30 September 2022. Thank you everyone, and thank you, Andres, once again, and I'll see you guys in the next event. Bye-bye.